The brass nameplate on the circulation desk read, "Elena Vasquez, head librarian," in simple block letters. Nothing about it suggested that the woman behind it had once killed 7 men in a single night in Prague. Elena adjusted her reading glasses and smiled warmly at Mrs. Henderson, who was returning a stack of romance novels with slightly embarrassed enthusiasm. "How did you like the latest Nicholas Sparks?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the faint accent that locals had never quite placed. Some thought it was Spanish, others Eastern European. The truth was more complicated than either guess. "Oh, you know me too well, dear," Mrs. Henderson laughed. "I'm a sucker for a good love story. Do you have any recommendations?" Eleanor's fingers moved across the computer keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up a list of new arrivals. At 34, she had been the head librarian of Millbrook Public Library for 6 years, ever since old Mr. Patterson retired. Her predecessor had left behind a modest but well-organized collection and a community that genuinely loved their small-town library. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, population 3,847, was the kind of place where people still waved at strangers, and the biggest excitement was usually the annual Harvest Festival. The library sat on the corner of Main and Elm, a converted Victorian mansion with tall windows and creaking wooden floors that Elena had grown to love. It was everything her previous life had not been: predictable, peaceful, and safe. "Try this one," Elena said, sliding a book across the counter. "It's set in a small coastal town, very atmospheric. I think you'll enjoy the mystery elements woven in with the romance." Mrs. Henderson clutched the book eagerly. "You always know exactly what I'll like. It's like you can read minds." If only she knew, Eleanor thought with an inward smile. Reading people had once been a matter of life and death. Now it helped her recommend books and mediate the occasional dispute over late fees. The transition from international assassin to small-town librarian hadn't been as difficult as she'd expected. Both jobs required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Elena's transformation had been deliberate and complete. Gone was Katerina Volkov, the ghost who had eliminated targets across 3 continents for the shadowy organization known only as the Consortium. That woman had died in a warehouse fire in Moscow 5 years ago, at least according to official records. Elena Vasquez had been born from careful planning, forged documents, and an unshakable desire to disappear entirely from her former world. The afternoon proceeded with its usual rhythm. Elena helped a group of teenagers with research for their history project, listened patiently as old Mr. Kowalski complained about the library's limited selection of military memoirs, and organized the children's area for tomorrow's story time. She moved through these tasks with the same methodical precision that had once made her one of the Consortium's most valuable assets, though now her targets were overdue notices and misplaced books. At closing time, Elena followed her established routine. She checked each reading nook and study carrel, ensuring no patrons lingered past hours. She straightened chairs, gathered abandoned coffee cups, and ran the daily reports on her computer. The ritual brought her comfort, each task a small confirmation that her new life remained stable and secure. As she locked the front door and activated the security system, Elena noticed a black sedan parked across the street. It hadn't been there when she'd arrived that morning, and something about its positioning set off alarm bells that no amount of small-town living had quite silenced. The windows were tinted too dark for Pennsylvania regulations, and the license plate was obscured by what appeared to be deliberate mud spattering. Elena forced herself to walk normally to her Honda Civic, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to assess threats and plan escape routes. She had worked too hard to build this life to let paranoia destroy it. The sedan was probably nothing more than a visitor unfamiliar with local parking regulations. Millbrook didn't attract the kind of attention that would bring her past hunting for her. Her small apartment above the bakery on Maple Street had been chosen for both its charm and its tactical advantages. The building was old brick with thick walls, had two separate exits, and provided clear sightlines to the street below. Elena had told herself these were simply practical considerations for a single woman living alone, but she knew the real reason. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept her alive for over a decade. Elena climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor home, keys ready before she reached the door. Another habit from her previous life that had proven useful even in Millbrook, where the most dangerous thing she'd encountered was Mrs. Kowalski's aggressive Yorkshire Terrier. Inside, her apartment reflected the same careful balance she'd struck throughout her new identity, comfortable and welcoming, but with subtle elements that spoke to deeper preparation. The living room featured a cozy reading chair positioned to observe the street, bookshelves filled with an eclectic mix of literature and reference materials, and a small dining table where she often graded homework for the literacy program she volunteered with at the community centre. What wasn't immediately visible were the reinforced locks, the emergency communication equipment hidden behind a false panel, and the go-bag tucked away in her bedroom closet. As Elena prepared dinner, pasta with vegetables from the small garden, she maintained on her fire escape. She reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. Katerina Volkov had been raised in a Russian orphanage, recruited at 15 by handlers who recognized her exceptional intelligence and natural ability to blend into any environment. She'd been trained in 11 languages, 17 different fighting disciplines, and enough technical skills to infiltrate any organization or eliminate any target. For nearly 2 decades, she'd been the perfect weapon, emotionally detached, strategically brilliant and completely loyal to the consortium. She'd eliminated corrupt politicians, rival agents, and criminal leaders across the globe, always disappearing without a trace. Her handlers had called her the Librarian because of her methodical approach and her ability to research targets so thoroughly that her strikes seemed almost academic in their precision. The irony of actually becoming a librarian wasn't lost on her. The transformation had begun during what was supposed to be her final mission. The target was Viktor Kozlov, a former consortium operative who had attempted to sell classified information to the highest bidder. Elena had tracked him to Prague, spent 2 weeks learning his routines, and prepared for a clean elimination that would send a message to any other potential traitors. But when she'd finally cornered Kozlov in his safe house, something had gone wrong. Instead of pleading for his life or attempting to bargain, he'd looked at her with something she'd never seen before in a target's eyes. Pity. "You don't know, do you?" he'd said, speaking in Russian. "You still think they value you, that you're more than just another tool to be discarded when you've outlived your usefulness." The words had struck her like physical blows. Before she could respond, Kozlov had activated a dead man's switch that sent encrypted files to news outlets around the world. Files that documented the consortium's operations, including detailed records of every mission Elena had completed. "Over the past 15 years, I'm already dead," Kozlov had said simply, "but maybe you don't have to be." The explosion that followed had been meant to eliminate both of them and destroy any evidence of the consortium's involvement. Elena had escaped through a window moments before the blast, but officially, both she and Kozlov had perished in the fire. The leaked documents had created enough chaos within the consortium's power structure that her absence went unnoticed in the immediate aftermath. She'd used those precious few weeks to disappear entirely, liquidating hidden accounts, activating emergency identities she'd prepared without the consortium's knowledge, and beginning the careful process of becoming Elena Vasquez. The transition hadn't been easy. She'd struggled with insomnia, hypervigilance, and the constant fear that her former employers would discover her deception. But gradually the rhythms of small-town life had worked their magic. Elena finished her dinner and settled into her reading chair with a cup of tea and the latest mystery novel from the library's collection. She'd developed a genuine love of books during her transformation, finding in fiction the emotional connections that had been surgically removed from her during her training. Through the lives of fictional characters, she'd slowly learned to understand and express the feelings she'd been taught to suppress. Outside her window, Millbrook settled into its evening quiet. Streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks where tomorrow children would walk to school and neighbors would greet each other by name. It was a world away from the shadowy international landscape where she'd once operated, and Elena had never been more grateful for anything in her life. The black sedan was gone when she checked the street before bed, confirming her assessment that it had been nothing more than a visitor or lost tourist. Still, she found herself double-checking her locks and reviewing her emergency procedures before finally allowing herself to sleep. Some instincts, it seemed, would never fully fade. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the first hints of autumn coloring the maple trees that gave the town its character. Elena arrived at the library 30 minutes before opening, as was her custom, to prepare for the day ahead. She unlocked the building, disabled the security system, and began her morning routine of checking for any overnight issues and preparing the circulation desk. It was while she was arranging the new book display that she noticed the envelope. Someone had slipped it under the front door overnight, which shouldn't have been possible given the door's tight seal and the building's security measures. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper that felt foreign in this setting of small-town Americana. Her name was written on the front in elegant script, Elena Vasquez, head librarian. Elena's blood turned to ice. The handwriting was unmistakable, though she hadn't seen it in over 5 years. It belonged to Marcus Webb, the consortium's primary handler and the closest thing to a father figure she'd ever known. The man who had trained her, guided her missions, and ultimately betrayed her along with the rest of the organization. With steady hands that betrayed none of the turmoil in her mind, Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper with a brief message. The librarian's work is never done. Some books must be returned. The reading room at St. Catherine's tonight at 11 p.m. Come alone, or the entire town becomes a footnote. Below the message was a photograph that made Elena's knees go weak. It showed the front of Millbrook Elementary School during yesterday's afternoon dismissal, with children streaming out toward waiting parents and school buses. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, stood a figure Eleanor recognized. Anton Kozlov, Victor's younger brother and one of the consortium's most ruthless enforcers. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly, despite the fear and rage coursing through her system. Her cover was blown, which meant the consortium had found her despite all her precautions. The message was clear: comply with their demands, or innocent people would pay the price. The children of Millbrook would become collateral damage in a war she'd thought she'd escaped. She looked around the library that had become her sanctuary, at the books and computers and comfortable reading spaces where families gathered for story time and students worked on homework. In a few hours, Mrs. Henderson would arrive looking for her next romance novel. The teenagers would claim their usual table for after-school study sessions. Mr. Kowalski would complain about the lack of military memoirs while secretly checking out romantic comedies he thought no one noticed. All of it would continue, Eleanor decided, because she would make sure of it. The librarian might be dead, but Elena Vasquez had found something worth protecting. If the consortium wanted to play games with her past, she would remind them exactly why they'd once considered her their most valuable asset. But first, she had a library to run and a community to protect. Elena tucked the envelope into her purse and began preparing for the day ahead, her mind already working through contingencies and strategies. She had 11 hours to plan, and she intended to use every minute wisely. The morning proceeded normally on the surface, though Elena found herself cataloguing defensive positions and exit routes with renewed intensity. She helped patrons with the same warmth and efficiency they'd come to expect, all while calculating response times for emergency services and identifying potential assets among the townspeople. When lunchtime arrived, Elena made her excuses and walked the 6 blocks to St. Catherine's Catholic Church. The old stone building sat on a hill overlooking the town, its bell tower providing an excellent vantage point for surveillance. She needed to scout the location Webb had chosen for their meeting to understand the tactical situation she'd be walking into. The church was open for midday prayers, and Elena slipped inside as just another parishioner seeking a moment of quiet reflection. St. Catherine's was typical of small-town churches: worn wooden pews, stained glass windows that cast colourful patterns on the floor, and the kind of peaceful atmosphere that invited contemplation. Elena knelt in a pew near the back, bowing her head as if in prayer, while she studied the building's layout. The reading room Webb had mentioned was likely the small library the church maintained for religious texts and community use. It was accessed through a side door near the altar, isolated enough for a private conversation, but positioned where any disturbance would be immediately noticed by anyone in the main sanctuary. Smart, Elena admitted grudgingly. Webb had chosen well. The location provided him with tactical advantages while limiting her options for violence or escape. Any aggressive action on her part would take place in a house of worship, something that would horrify the community she'd worked so hard to join. After 20 minutes of reconnaissance disguised as prayer, Elena left the church and returned to the library. She spent the afternoon in a careful balance of normal routine and covert preparation, helping patrons while mentally reviewing skills she'd hoped never to need again. As the day wore on, Elena found herself studying the faces of everyone who entered the library. Were any of them consortium operatives conducting surveillance? Was the businessman reading newspapers in the periodical section actually monitoring her movements? Had the teenage couple giggling over young adult novels been planted to observe her reactions? Paranoia had been a survival tool in her previous life, but it felt toxic in the environment she'd worked so hard to create. Elena reminded herself that she was fighting not just for her own life, but for the right of Millbrook to remain the safe, innocent community it had always been. At closing time, Elena followed her usual routine with unusual care. She checked every corner of the building, ensuring no unwelcome visitors had concealed themselves among the stacks. She backed up all the library's computer files and secured the petty cache, practical precautions that doubled as preparations for the possibility that she might not return to work tomorrow. The black sedan was back, parked in the same position as the previous evening. This time, Elena didn't pretend not to notice it. She studied the vehicle openly as she walked to her car, noting the subtle modifications that suggested armor and communications equipment. The message was clear: she was being watched, and any attempt to deviate from the expected script would have consequences. Elena drove home through Millbrook's quiet streets, acutely aware of the sedan following at a discreet distance. She waved to Mr. Chen, who was closing his hardware store, and smiled at the young mother pushing a stroller toward the park. These people trusted her, had welcomed her into their community without question. They deserved better than to become pawns in a game they couldn't possibly understand. Back in her apartment, Elena allowed herself 30 minutes for what might be her final evening as the woman she'd worked so hard to become. She watered her plants, organized her bookshelf, and wrote a letter to be opened only if she didn't survive the night. The letter explained her true identity and provided detailed instructions for protecting the library and its staff from any potential retaliation. As darkness fell over Millbrook, Elena prepared for war. She retrieved her go-bag from its hiding place, checking the contents methodically. Cash, false identification documents, encrypted communication equipment, and medical supplies. From a separate cache, she withdrew items she'd hoped never to touch again. A ceramic knife that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, a compact pistol with subsonic ammunition, and a selection of tools that had once made her one of the most feared assassins in the world. Elena changed into dark, flexible clothing that would allow for movement while blending into shadows. She studied herself in the mirror, noting how the familiar gear transformed her appearance from small-town librarian to something far more dangerous. The transformation was both disturbing and oddly comforting, like slipping into a well-worn goat. At 10:30 p.m., Elena left her apartment through the back exit, moving through Millbrook's sleeping streets with the ghost-like silence that had once been her trademark. The town looked different in darkness, shadows concealing potential threats and familiar landmarks becoming navigation points for someone planning violence. St. Catherine's bell tower was visible from blocks away, its clock face glowing against the night sky. As Elena approached the church, she spotted at least 3 positions where surveillance teams could be concealed. The consortium had brought significant resources to this confrontation, which meant they considered her either extremely valuable or extremely dangerous, possibly both. Elena entered the church through a side door she'd noted during her earlier reconnaissance, her lockpicks making quick work of the simple mechanism. Inside, the building was dark except for the eternal flame burning near the altar and moonlight filtering through stained glass windows. She moved silently through the sanctuary toward the reading room, every sense alert for signs of ambush or trap. The familiar weight of weapons at her waist provided grim comfort as she approached the door where her past had finally caught up with her present. Whatever Marcus Webb wanted, whatever game the consortium was playing, Elena was ready. She had 11 years of small-town peace to protect, and she intended to fight for every moment of the life she'd built. The reading room. Door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the darkened hallway beyond. Elena paused just outside, listening for voices or movement that might reveal how many people waited inside. Hearing nothing, she pushed the door open and stepped into her past. Marcus Webb sat alone at a small table, looking exactly as she remembered. Silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of calm confidence that came from decades of orchestrating death from comfortable distances. He smiled when he saw her, the expression carrying genuine warmth that made Elena's skin crawl. "Hello, Katerina," he said, using her real name for the first time in 5 years. "You look well. Small-town life agrees with you." Elena remained standing near the door, her hand positioned for quick access to her weapon. "I go by Elena now, and if you've hurt anyone in this town, please," Webb interrupted, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit. We have much to discuss, and very little time to do it." Elena stayed where she was. "Start talking. What do you want?" Webb's smile faded slightly, replaced by the businesslike expression she remembered from mission briefings. "The consortium is in crisis. The organization is fragmenting, old alliances are crumbling, and several of our former assets have gone rogue. We need experienced operatives to help restore order. Not interested. I thought you might say that, which is why I brought incentive." Webb produced a tablet computer and set it on the table between them. The screen displayed a live surveillance feed from Millbrook Elementary School, where a night janitor was going about his usual cleaning routine, completely unaware of the crosshairs superimposed over his image. "Anton Kozlov is positioned with a high-powered rifle in the building across the street," Webb explained casually. "One word from me, and the janitor dies. Tomorrow morning, when teachers and children begin arriving for school, Anton will have multiple targets. He's quite skilled, as you know. Very thorough. Eleanor's blood turned to ice, but she kept her expression neutral. You're bluffing. The consortium doesn't target civilians without cause. The old consortium didn't, Webb corrected. But as I said, we're in crisis. Desperate times call for flexible ethics. Anton has been given full authorization to eliminate anyone who might interfere with your recruitment. The tablet screen split to show multiple feeds. The school, the library, her apartment building, and several other locations around town. Each feed showed a figure in tactical gear positioned for maximum lethality. Eleanor counted at least 6 operatives, enough firepower to turn Millbrook into a war zone. As you can see, Webb continued, we've invested significant resources in this conversation. The consortium values you highly, Katerina. Enough to surround an entire town to ensure your cooperation. Elena finally moved from her position by the door, walking slowly to the chair across from Webb. She sat down carefully, her mind racing through tactical options, even as she maintained an outward appearance of calm consideration. What exactly are you asking me to do? Webb leaned forward slightly, his eyes brightening with the enthusiasm of a man closing a successful negotiation. 3 targets, high-priority eliminations that require your particular skill set. Complete these assignments and the consortium will disappear from your life permanently. You can return to your books and your small-town anonymity with our blessing. And if I refuse, Webb's expression hardened, then Millbrook becomes a footnote in history. The official story will be a gas leak explosion at the school during morning assembly. Tragic accident. No survivors. Eleanor stared at the surveillance feeds, watching innocent people go about their evening routines while trained killers waited for orders to end their lives. She thought about Mrs. Henderson and her romance novels, about the teenagers who trusted her with their homework struggles, about all the small kindnesses that had slowly healed wounds she'd thought were permanent. "Show me the targets," she said, quietly. Webb smiled and produced 3 folders from his briefcase. "I knew you'd see reason. The first is—" "Not here," Elena interrupted, "and not tonight. I need time to prepare, and I need guarantees about the town's safety during the mission." Webb considered her request for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But understand, Katerina, that every day of delay increases the risk to your adopted community. Anton grows impatient easily, and the other operatives are expensive to maintain in position." Elena stood, her decision made, but her strategy still forming. "Give me 48 hours. I'll need that long to arrange things at the library. And prepare for extended absence." "Acceptable," Webb agreed, gathering his materials. "But remember, we're watching. Any attempt to contact authorities or flee will result in immediate retaliation against civilian targets." As Webb left the reading room, Elena remained seated, studying the surveillance feeds on the tablet he'd left behind. The faces of Millbrooks. Residents looked back at her from the screens, each one representing a life she'd sworn to protect when she chose to call this place home. Elena Vasquez, head librarian and pillar of the community, would have been helpless against this threat. But Katerina Volkov, the ghost who had once been the consortium's most feared operative, had resources and skills that Marcus Webb might have forgotten. The game was far from over, and Elena intended to write the final chapter herself. Elena returned to her apartment at 2 a.m., moving through Millbrook's empty streets with practiced stealth. The surveillance teams were still in position. She counted at least 4 different watchers tracking her movement, but they maintained professional distance, confident in their leverage over the situation. Back in her apartment, Elena sat at her kitchen table and opened the 3 target folders Webb had left with her. The names and faces staring back from the classified documents made her stomach turn cold. The first target was Dr. Sarah Chen, a former consortium scientist who had helped develop enhanced interrogation techniques before disappearing with classified research files. She was now working as a pediatric oncologist in Seattle, using her knowledge of human psychology to help children cope with cancer treatment. The second was Thomas Reeves, an ex-operative who had stolen millions from Consortium. Accounts before vanishing, he'd apparently used the money to establish a network of safe houses for victims of human trafficking, operating under the identity of a social worker in Phoenix. The third file contained a photograph that made Elena's hands shake. Father Miguel Santos, a Catholic priest in El Paso who ran a shelter for refugees. Elena recognized him as Father Miguel Rodriguez, a former Consortium interrogator whose crisis of conscience had led him to provide intelligence to law enforcement agencies, investigating the organization's activities. 3 people who had escaped the Consortium and dedicated their new lives to helping others. 3 people whose deaths would serve as examples to any other defectors considering betrayal. Elena understood the message clearly. Cooperation with authorities would not be tolerated. Redemption was impossible, and the Consortium's reach was limitless. But Elena also understood something Webb might have overlooked in his arrogance. Each of these targets possessed skills and knowledge that could be valuable in a larger conflict. Dr. Chen understood Consortium psychology operations. Reeves had intelligence about their financial networks. Father Santos knew their interrogation, techniques, and safe house locations. Elena spent the pre-dawn hours developing a plan that would appear to fulfill her assignment while actually building an alliance against her former employers. It would require precise timing, careful communication, and the kind of strategic thinking that had made her legendary within Consortium circles. At 7 a.m., Elena arrived at the library as usual, maintaining her normal routine despite the armed operatives watching from concealed positions around town. Mrs. Henderson was waiting by the front door with her characteristic enthusiasm. "Oh, Elena, dear, I finished that book you recommended. Do you have the sequel?" Elena smiled warmly, unlocking the library while scanning for signs of surveillance equipment. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. I set it aside for you yesterday." As Elena went through her morning routine, she began implementing her plan. Using the library's computer system, she accessed academic databases and genealogy websites, ostensibly researching her targets, but actually establishing encrypted communication channels with resistance networks she'd identified during her years. Underground. The first message went to Dr. Chen through a medical journal forum embedded in what appeared to be a routine question about pediatric treatment protocols. The code was subtle, designed to look like professional inquiry while conveying urgent warning about immediate danger. By lunchtime, Elena had sent similar warnings to all 3 targets, along with coded instructions for a meeting that would either save their lives or end them all. The risk was enormous. If the Consortium discovered her deception, Millbrook would pay the price, but Elena had learned something important during her 5 years of civilian life. Some things were worth dying for. That evening, Webb returned to St. Catherine's reading room for a progress report. Elena arrived prepared with fabricated intelligence about her target's current locations and security arrangements, information detailed enough to satisfy his expectations while being completely false. Dr. Chen maintains a predictable schedule, Elena reported, spreading doctored surveillance photos across the table. She arrives at the hospital at 6 a.m., leaves at 7 p.m., minimal security, trusting nature. The elimination will be straightforward. Webb nodded approvingly. And the others? Elena provided similar reports, each containing enough accurate detail to seem genuine, while omitting critical information that would compromise the target's safety. As she spoke, she watched Webb's expression carefully, looking for signs that he suspected her deception. "Excellent work," Webb said finally. "I'd forgotten how thorough you could be. When will you move on the first target?" "Tomorrow night. I'll need to travel to Seattle, establish surveillance, and wait for the optimal moment. Clean, quiet, no complications." Webb stood, his satisfaction evident. "I'm pleased to see you remember your training. Complete these assignments efficiently, and the consortium will honor our agreement." After Webb left, Elena remained in the reading room, using her phone to send coded messages to the 3 targets. Each message contained detailed intelligence about consortium operations, safe house locations, and contact information for law enforcement agencies that could provide protection. Dr. Chen responded first, confirming receipt of the warning and providing intelligence about consortium psychological operations that could be used against them. Reeves followed with financial data and communication intercepts that revealed other consortium targets. Father Santos offered access to a network of safe houses and trusted contacts throughout the southwestern United States. By dawn, Elena had assembled a comprehensive dossier on current consortium operations, including the names and locations of operatives, safe houses, financial accounts, and planned targets. The information represented years of accumulated intelligence that could cripple the organization if properly deployed. Elena spent her second day at the library coordinating with federal agencies through encrypted channels, providing evidence of consortium activities while carefully protecting her own identity and location. She learned that multiple law enforcement agencies had been investigating the organization for years, lacking only the inside information necessary to build prosecutable cases. That information was now flowing through channels that would soon result in coordinated raids across 3 continents. As evening approached, Elena prepared for the most dangerous part of her plan. She would need to appear to leave town for her assassination mission while actually remaining in Millbrook to coordinate the final phase of operations against the consortium. Using skills learned during years of covert operations, Elena staged her departure from town, allowing surveillance teams to observe her loading luggage into her car and driving toward the highway. 5 miles outside Millbrook, she switched vehicles at a prearranged location, leaving her Honda behind while taking a motorcycle that would allow her to return to town undetected. By midnight, Elena had infiltrated St. Catherine's Church through a route that avoided all known surveillance positions. She spent the early morning hours in the bell tower, using advanced communications equipment to coordinate with law enforcement agencies, preparing for simultaneous raids on consortium facilities worldwide. At 3 a.m. Eastern Time, the operation began. Elena watched through her scope as federal agents moved through Millbrook in coordinated teams, neutralizing consortium operatives with precision and efficiency. Anton Kozlov was taken into custody outside the elementary school, his sniper rifle and tactical equipment secured as evidence. Other operatives were arrested at their positions throughout town, their surveillance equipment and weapons providing additional proof of consortium activities. Webb's final meeting was at dawn, scheduled for the church reading room where their arrangement had begun. Elena arrived first, positioning herself where she could observe his reaction to the coordinated arrests that had dismantled his entire operation. When Webb entered the reading room, his confident demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled fury. "You betrayed us. I protected my community," Elena replied calmly. "The consortium threatened innocent people. That was a mistake." Webb reached for a concealed weapon, but Elena was faster. Years of library work hadn't dulled her reflexes, and Webb found himself staring down the barrel of her pistol before he could clear his holster. "It's over, Marcus. The consortium is finished. Your operatives are in custody, your accounts are frozen, and your safe houses are compromised." The 3 targets you wanted eliminated are now under federal protection, providing testimony that will ensure life sentences for any consortium leadership who survive the purge. Webb's expression shifted from fury to resignation. You were always our best operative. I suppose it's fitting that you would be our downfall as well. Federal agents entered the reading room as Elena secured Webb's weapon. Agent Patricia Morrison, FBI Counterintelligence, nodded respectfully as she placed Webb under arrest. Ms. Vasquez, we appreciate your cooperation in this operation. The intelligence you provided has resulted in the arrest of over 60 consortium operatives worldwide. Elena holstered her weapon, feeling the weight of 5 years lift from her shoulders. What happens now? That depends on you. The consortium no longer exists as a functional organization. Your testimony has helped us dismantle their network completely. You're free to return to your life here, with our assurance that no retaliatory action is possible. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Elena walked through her town's quiet streets, noting the subtle signs that federal agents were completing their cleanup operations. By afternoon, the last traces of consortium presence would be gone, leaving only the peaceful community she had worked so hard to protect. Elena arrived at the library at her usual time, unlocking the door and preparing for another day of helping patrons with their literary needs. Mrs. Henderson was waiting with her characteristic enthusiasm, clutching the romance novel Elena had recommended days earlier. Oh, Elena, that book was wonderful. Do you have any other recommendations? Elena smiled, adjusting her reading glasses as she moved behind the circulation desk. The nameplate still read Elena Vasquez, head librarian, and she intended to keep it that way for many years to come. I have just the thing, Elena said, pulling up the catalogue on her computer. It's about second chances and new beginnings. I think you'll love it. Outside the library windows, Millbrook continued its peaceful rhythm, unaware of how close it had come to destruction. Elena had found her happy ending not through violence, but through the courage to protect what mattered most. The librarian's work was finally truly done.